The silence in the study was a physical weight. It pressed down on the thick Aubusson carpet, absorbed the scent of old leather and his cologne, a sharp, clean note of cedar, and clung to the velvet curtains drawn against the sole afternoon. Nadia moved through it with a practiced economy of motion, her dark red uniform a whisper of fabric against the quiet. She emptied the wastebasket, her movements precise, her gaze kept respectfully low. She was a ghost in this house of function, and that was how she survived. Her focus was on the small rituals of her job. The coaster placed just so. The crystal glass of water refilled without a sound. The pen returned to its holder. Anything to avoid looking at the man who dominated the room even in his stillness. Park Min-joon sat behind a desk of polished mahogany that could have seated 8. The desk was a throne, but the chair he occupied was a cage. Polished chrome and black leather, the wheelchair was an extension of him now, a cold, mechanical fact. From the waist down, he was immobile. From the waist up, he was a predator in repose. His bespoke suit, a charcoal gray that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, did nothing to soften the lethal energy coiled in his torso. His hands, resting on the arms of the chair, were objects of brutal elegance, long fingers, clean nails, a heavy gold ring on his pinky. They were the hands of a man who could break things. Or people. Nadia had worked in his mansion for 6 months. She had learned the geography of his silence, the subtle shift in his posture that signaled displeasure, the tightening of his jaw that preceded a command. She had never heard him raise his voice. He did not need to. His power was absolute, a low hum beneath the surface of the world she now inhabited. A sharp, feminine voice cut through the stillness from the hallway. "I am not waiting, Sung. I am his fiancé. I will see him now." Nadia froze, duster in hand. She had seen the woman only in photographs displayed around the mansion, photographs that had, one by one, begun to disappear. Lee Hannah, impossibly beautiful, with the delicate features and flawless skin of a porcelain doll. The study doors opened without a knock. Hannah swept in, a vision in pale pink Chanel, her expression a mask of strained patience. She did not spare Nadia a glance. Her eyes, cold and assessing, landed on Min-joon. "We need to talk," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Min-joon's head lifted slowly. His gaze, dark and unreadable, met hers. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to his head of security, Sung, who lingered in the doorway. Sung bowed and pulled the door shut, leaving the 3 of them in the suffocating quiet. "We are talking," Min-joon said. His voice was a low baritone, smooth as whiskey, but with an edge of broken glass. Hannah's perfectly painted lips thinned. "About this situation. The wedding is in 2 months. My parents are asking questions. Our guests are asking questions." She gestured vaguely at his chair, a flick of her wrist filled with disgust. "They want to know what to expect." "Expect me to be there," he answered, his voice dangerously soft. A brittle laugh escaped her. "Like this? Min-joon, be serious. This is not what we agreed to. This is not the man I agreed to marry." Nadia felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the damask wallpaper. This was a private agony, a humiliation she had no right to witness. She tried to retreat toward the door, but Min-joon's voice stopped her. "Stay," he commanded. It was not loud, but it had the force of a physical barrier. Nadia's feet rooted to the floor. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Hannah finally seemed to notice her, her eyes flicking over Nadia's uniform with open contempt. "You're discussing this in front of the staff. She is invisible," Min-joon said, his eyes never leaving Hannah's face. "As you have been for the past 3 months. Tell me, Hannah, what did you agree to?" "I agreed to a partnership," she snapped, her composure cracking. "I agreed to be the wife of the most powerful man in Seoul." Not this, the word hung in the air, thick with pity and revulsion. "A man who cannot even walk me down the aisle. A man who cannot stand." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Nadia could feel the temperature in the room plummet. Min-joon's face was a mask carved from stone, But she saw the flicker in his eyes, a darkness that was not just anger, but a profound, chilling wound. He had been betrayed not by an enemy with a gun, but by the woman who was supposed to be his queen. The contracts are void, Hannah continued, pulling a slim envelope from her handbag and placing it on the edge of the massive desk. My father's lawyers have been in touch with yours. The alliance between our families is no longer viable. She turned, her heels clicking with sharp finality on the hardwood floor. She did not look back. The doors opened and closed, and she was gone. The silence that descended was different now. It was heavier, sharper, filled with the echoes of what had been said. Nadia stood frozen, her gaze fixed on a point on the far wall. She did not dare to look at him, did not dare to breathe. She had seen the Emperor stripped of his armor, and she was certain she would be punished for the transgression. She waited for the order to leave, to pack her things, to be erased from this house and this life. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The only sound was the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. The envelope, Minjun said, his voice raw. Nadia's head snapped up. He was looking at the white envelope on the desk, a stark symbol of his defeat. It was just out of his reach. He could lean, could stretch, but the angle was wrong. A wave of frustration, so potent it was almost visible, radiated from him. He would not ask for help. His pride was a fortress. Slowly, deliberately, Nadia moved. She crossed the expanse of the carpet, her footsteps swallowed by the plush pile. She picked up the envelope. Its paper was thick, expensive. She held it for a moment, then placed it directly into his waiting hand. Her fingers brushed against his, and a jolt, like static electricity, passed between them. His skin was warm, his hand hard with muscle and bone. He took the envelope without looking at her. His gaze was fixed on some distant point beyond the window. "Leave me," he said. It was a dismissal. Nadia retreated, her heart still pounding a frantic rhythm. She backed out of the room, pulling the heavy doors closed behind her. But as she stood in the hallway, the image of his face, the profound isolation in his eyes, was burned into her mind. She had seen the monster. Now, for the first time, she had seen the man. And she knew, with a certainty that terrified her, that she would not be leaving. That was the moment everything changed. The days that followed settled into a new, tense rhythm. Minjun rarely left the study. He conducted his business from the mahogany desk, his lieutenants coming and going with quiet deference. They never looked at the wheelchair, but their awareness of it was a constant, suffocating presence. They spoke to the man, but they saw the weakness. Nadia saw it too, but she also saw other things. She saw the way he worked with a focus so intense it was almost frightening. He absorbed reports, issued orders, and moved pieces on a board she could not comprehend, all with a surgical precision that had nothing to do with his legs. She saw the brutal discipline of his physical therapy sessions, conducted in the private gym. She would bring him water, her eyes fixed on the floor, but she could hear the strained grunts, the sheer, agonizing effort he expended trying to command muscles that no longer obeyed. And she was the only one who saw the moments in between. The flicker of pain he could not hide when a spasm seized his back. The flash of fury in his eyes when he dropped a file just beyond his reach. She would retrieve it silently, placing it back in his hand without a word. She never offered help, but she was always there to provide it when the need became undeniable. She did not treat him with pity. She treated him with a quiet, unobtrusive respect that was its own form of defiance. One evening, she brought his dinner tray to the study. A storm was raging outside, rain lashing against the bulletproof glass. He was staring out at the deluge, his profile stark against the flashing lightning. "They think I am finished," he said, not looking at her. It was the most he had said to her in weeks. Nadia set the tray down on a small table beside his chair. "Are you?" she asked, her voice soft. He turned his head, and his eyes, dark, intelligent, and filled with a cold fire, pinned her in place. It was the first time he had truly looked at her, not as a piece of furniture or a function, but as a person. "What do you think, Nadia?" he asked, using her name. He said it differently than anyone else had. It was not a question so much as a demand for an honest assessment. She met his gaze, her own fear warring with a strange, burgeoning sense of loyalty. "I think," she said, choosing her words with care, "that a lion is still a lion, even in a cage." A long silence stretched between them, punctuated by the rumble of distant thunder. A flicker of something, surprise, maybe even respect, crossed his features before being locked down again behind his impassive mask. "Eat your dinner, sir," she said, her professionalism a shield. "It will get cold." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her again.
"Stay.
The storm is loud." It was not a request. Nadia stood by the window, her back to him, and watched the rain. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with the things they did not say, with the storm inside that matched the one outside. She told herself it was survival instinct, this strange connection she felt. She told herself she was just doing her job. She was lying to herself. The first real tremor of danger came a week later. It arrived in a lacquered box delivered by a courier who vanished before security could question him. Sung, Min-jun's most trusted man, brought it to the study on a silver tray, as if it were a fine jewel. Min-jun opened it himself. Inside, nestled on a bed of black silk, was a single, dead white camellia. Nadia, who was clearing away his lunch tray, saw the blood drain from Sung's face. "The Kims," Sung breathed, his voice tight with a mixture of fury and dread. "They are getting bold." Min-jun stared at the flower, his expression unreadable. The Kims were his family's oldest rivals. The whispers in the household staff were that they were responsible for the accident that had put him in the chair. This flower was a message. "We know you are wounded. We are coming to finish the job." "Double the perimeter guards," Min-jun ordered, his voice calm, almost detached. "And find the courier. I want to know who he works for, who his family is, everything." He closed the box with a soft click. "They have mistaken my patience for weakness. It will be their last mistake." The tension in the mansion became a constant, suffocating presence. Guards were more visible, their faces grim. Cars were searched at the gates. A new, unspoken fear settled over the staff. Several of the younger maids quit without notice, disappearing into the night. Nadia thought about it. She could walk away. She had some money saved. She could disappear back into the anonymity of Seoul, find another job, and forget the man with the cold eyes and the cedar-scented cologne. But she stayed. She told herself it was because the pay was too good to leave. She told herself she was not a coward. The truth was, she could not abandon him. She had seen the solitary man behind the powerful facade, and leaving felt like a betrayal on par with Hannah's. It was an illogical, dangerous loyalty, but it had taken root in her heart. The attack came on a Tuesday night. It was not subtle. It was a declaration of war. An explosion at the main gate was the opening salvo, a brutal distraction. As the bulk of the security force rushed to the front of the estate, two teams of armed men breached the rear wall, moving with silent, military precision. The alarms blared, a shrill, piercing scream that cut through the house. Nadia had been in the library, shelving books. She heard the first muffled pops of silenced gunfire, and her blood ran cold. Sung burst into the room, his face pale, a gun in his hand. "They're inside," he said to Min-jun, who had been wheeled in from the study moments before. "We need to get you to the panic room." The mansion's safe room was in the sub-basement, a reinforced bunker. But it was on the other side of the house, across the grand foyer which had now become a kill zone. "Too far," Min-jun said, his voice a blade of ice. "They will cut us off." He was calm, his mind already working, calculating angles and probabilities. He was a general, and this house was his battlefield. Gunfire erupted from the main hall, closer now. The sound of shattering glass echoed down the corridor. "There is another way," Nadia heard herself say. Both men turned to look at her. In their world, she was meant to be invisible, silent. "The old service passages," she elaborated, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "Behind the tapestry in this room. They run along the east wing. They come out in the wine cellar, right below the gym." It has a reinforced door. Sung stared at her, stunned. He had been in this house for a decade and did not know. But Nadia's job was to know the house's secrets, the dusty, forgotten corners, the passages used by servants a century ago. Min Jun's eyes locked on hers. He saw no fear, only resolve. "Show him," he commanded. Nadia ran to the far wall, pulling aside a heavy medieval tapestry depicting a boar hunt. Behind it, almost perfectly camouflaged in the wood paneling, was a narrow door with no handle. She pressed a knot in the woodwork, and the door clicked open, revealing a dark, dusty passage. The air was stale, smelling of stone and disuse. It could be a trap. It is not secure. They will not expect it, Min Jun countered, his gaze still on Nadia. Go. Getting the wheelchair through the narrow passage was a nightmare. Sung pushed from behind while Nadia pulled from the front, her hands gripping the cold metal frame. The wheels caught on the uneven stone floor. In the cramped darkness, she was pressed close to Min Jun, her shoulder brushing his arm. She could feel the heat of his body, smell the clean scent of his skin beneath the cologne. He was silent, his jaw tight with the effort of keeping his body balanced. They could hear the fight raging above them, shouts, the roar of automatic weapons, the sickening thud of bodies falling. Down here, there was only the sound of their own ragged breaths and the grating of the wheels on stone. At one point, the chair snagged hard. Sung swore under his breath, straining. It is stuck, he grunted. For a split second, they were trapped. Min Jun's hand shot out and gripped Nadia's arm. His touch was not painful, but it was absolute, a brand of heat on her skin. Get out of here, he ordered her, his voice low and urgent. Go. That is an order. He was trying to save her. He was prepared to die here, in this dusty, forgotten tunnel, to give her and Sung a chance to escape. Nadia looked from his hand on her arm to his eyes, which were blazing with a fierce, protective light. In that moment, she crossed a line she could not uncross. She was no longer just a maid. No, she said, her voice shaking but resolute. She yanked her arm free and twisted around, examining the wheel. A loose stone was wedged in the spokes. With frantic strength, she worked it free. Push, she commanded Sung. They burst into the wine cellar just as the sounds of fighting from above began to fade. Sung barred the heavy cellar door, a thick slab of steel disguised as oak. They were safe for now. The cellar was cold and silent, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and aging wine. The only light came from a single emergency bulb. In the dim glow, Nadia could see the strain on Min Jun's face. He looked at her and the mask was gone. In its place was something raw and vulnerable. They all see the chair, he said, his voice barely a whisper. You see me? It was not a declaration of love. It was something more dangerous. It was an admission of truth, a confession of a shared intimacy forged in terror and darkness. She had not just saved his life. She had seen past his prison of flesh and steel and acknowledged the king still on the throne. The aftermath of the attack left the mansion scarred but standing. The Kim faction had been repelled, but not without cost. 2 of Min Jun's best men were dead. The message was clear. They would not stop. A new, chilling quiet settled over the house. Min Jun became even more remote, more dangerous. He spent hours with Sung and his other lieutenants, his voice a low, lethal murmur as they planned their retaliation. But his eyes would always find Nadia. When she brought him coffee, when she cleared a room, he would watch her. The space between them was charged with the memory of the service passage, with his confession in the wine cellar. Nadia knew she was in over her head. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But when she looked at him, she saw the man who had ordered her to save herself, who had been willing to face his enemies alone in the dark. She could not leave him. It was no longer a choice. The Kims, having failed to kill him, changed their tactics. They began looking for a new weakness, a different kind of leverage. And their eyes, inevitably, fell on the quiet, observant maid who moved through the lion's den untouched. It happened on her day off. She was at a small market in Itaewon, buying spices for her own apartment, enjoying a few hours of normalcy. The feeling of being watched started as a prickle on the back of her neck. She dismissed it as paranoia. Then she saw them. Two men in dark suits, trying to look casual, but their eyes and stiff posture gave them away. They were not Min Jun's men. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She ducked into a crowded alleyway, her heart hammering. She pulled out her phone, her fingers fumbling on the screen. She had only one number she could call. She pressed it. Sung answered on the first ring. "Where are you?" His voice was tight with alarm. "Itaewon Market," she gasped, pressing herself against a brick wall. "Two men. They are following me. Stay where you are. Do not move. We are on our way." But it was too late. A hand clamped over her mouth from behind. Another arm like a steel band wrapped around her waist, lifting her off her feet. She was dragged backward into a waiting black car, the door slamming shut, plunging her into darkness. The last thing she saw was her phone skittering across the grimy pavement. The final confrontation was not in a boardroom or across a battlefield, but in a cold, abandoned warehouse by the Han River. Nadia was tied to a chair, the rough ropes chafing her wrists. Across from her, Kim Jin-woo, the head of the rival faction, smiled. He was a man who looked soft, with a round face and expensive clothes, but his eyes were as dead as a shark's. "He will come for you," Jin-woo said, almost conversationally. "His little pet. He has a weakness for strays, it seems. A man in his condition should be more careful about his attachments." The insult was meant to break her, to make her feel small and insignificant. But all Nadia felt was a cold, hard rage. Hours later, the warehouse doors rumbled open. A single black sedan drove into the vast, cavernous space and stopped. The engine cut out, plunging the warehouse into an eerie silence. The car door opened. Sung got out from the driver's side. He went to the back and opened the door, unfolding a ramp. And then, Min Jun wheeled himself out of the car and into the open. Alone. Jin-woo laughed, a high, unpleasant sound. "You came alone? To trade your empire for a maid? I knew you were weak, but this is pathetic." "Let her go," Min Jun said, his voice calm, echoing in the huge space. He stopped 20 feet away, alone, disabled king on a concrete battlefield. "I do not think so," Jin-woo sneered, pulling a pistol and pressing it to Nadia's temple. The cold metal made her flinch. "You see, I am going to take everything from you. I will kill her, and then I will kill you." Nadia looked at Min Jun. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were locked on hers. There was no fear in them. There was only a promise. She remembered the layout of the warehouse from when they brought her in. The stacks of crates, the catwalks above. And she remembered the small, almost invisible detail she had noticed when Jin-woo's men were setting up. A leak from a rusty barrel of industrial solvent, pooling near a frayed electrical cable. She had to create an opening. "He did not come alone," Nadia said, her voice loud and clear. Jin-woo's grip tightened. "Quiet. You think he is a fool?" she continued, her eyes still on Min Jun's. She began to rock her chair, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, edging it backward, inch by inch, toward the puddle. "You attacked his home. You threatened his people. You brought him to your territory. He is not the one in a trap. It was a gamble, a desperate play." As she spoke, she saw a flicker in Min Jun's eyes. He understood. "Kill her." Jin-woo screamed at one of his men, realizing too late that he was being played. But as the man raised his gun, Nadia gave one final, violent shove with her feet. The chair tipped backward. She crashed to the concrete, the impact jarring her teeth, but the chair leg landed exactly where she intended, in the puddle of solvent, right next to the frayed cable. A shower of brilliant blue sparks erupted. The solvent ignited with a deafening whoosh. A wall of chemical fire roared to life, separating Jin-woo and his men from Nadia and the exit. In that instant of chaos and blindness, the warehouse exploded into motion. Min Jun's men, hidden in the darkness and on the catwalks, opened fire. It was not a fight. It was an execution. Surgical, deliberate, and absolute. Sung was at Nadia's side in a second, cutting her ropes. He pulled her to her feet and pushed her toward the car. Min Jun had not moved. He sat in his chair, watching the last of his enemies fall, a silent, grim-faced monarch surveying his victory. When it was over, Sung helped her into the back of the sedan. Min Jun wheeled himself to the open door and looked at her. His face was illuminated by the flickering flames. He reached out, not to touch her face or her hand, but to brush a stray piece of debris from her sleeve. The gesture was more intimate than any kiss. "You are mine now," he said. It was not a question or a proposal. It was a statement of fact, a claim. No one will touch you again. She looked at him, this dangerous, broken, and beautiful man. She saw the cost of his world in the bodies on the floor and the fire in the distance. She knew that staying with him meant embracing that darkness, that violence. It meant a life in the shadow of his throne. Nadia did not answer with words. She simply reached out and placed her hand on the cool metal frame of his wheelchair. It was not a gesture of pity or service. It was an acceptance, a choice. Her hand on the steel, his eyes on her. They were two solitary figures, bound together by violence and a loyalty that defied all reason, ready to face the world they had made.